Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, along with my co-host, Dr. Nikki Robinson.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're joined by Richard Stiennon. Richard, thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I've been following your content and your insights for quite a while now, so I'm really excited to chat with you today. But for folks that don't know you or haven't followed you quite yet, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I've been a industry analyst covering cybersecurity for 22 years now. And before that, I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I guess I was a pen tester, but I was doing, security audits of very large companies. And I got started in security at a company called Netrex, which I think can claim the title of being the first MSSP in the United States. And they were eventually acquired by ISS, which got acquired by IBM. And the Netrex SOC is actually still here. One of them is still here in Michigan. It's an IBM part of their managed service. So that's how I got into it. And right now I write books, including my life's work, security industry, the Security Yearbook 2022. It's a history of our industry. Nobody else has written that, but might as well write it while the pioneers are still alive.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that is actually, I'm glad you brought it up because that is the first thing I want to talk about. Because I've been really interested in this because this is your third iteration of this, right? You started in 2020 and 2021 and now 2022, and it's really just sort of grown since then. Can you talk a little bit about what sort of compelled you to start building this research, just to start putting this together?
Yeah, so I was at RSA 2019, and I was signing a book in the Zscaler booth, and I think I signed 400 books, and it was just such a great experience. I was going, hey, I should write a book for next year, for 2020. And I noticed a lot of people were coming up to me, shaking my hand, back when you could shake 400 people's hands and not be concerned. And they'd say, oh, yeah, I just joined the security industry 2 weeks ago, and my employer told me to come to RSA to learn all about security. And I remember just going, wow, they're going to really be challenged trying to pick up on anything, let alone they'll come away thinking cybersecurity is all about zero trust or all about something, whatever the latest theme is for RSA. And then I'd walk the outskirts of the show where all the cool startups are and talk to the founders of those. They'd be young and all excited about their new approach to endpoint or network security. And no matter what they said, I'd say, oh, that sounds a lot like so-and-so, 20 years ago. And they'd always go, well, who's that? Never heard of them. In other words, they haven't learned from what went before, where people have tried the exact same thing. It would be really valuable to know where it went wrong or if it succeeded, etc. So that's when it gelled in my mind. I'm going to write a history of the industry. It'll be useful for people getting into it. It'd be really useful for founders. And hey, this happens to be a good place to publish the directory of all the vendors that I've been keeping for 17 years.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel very much the same way about, writing a book and putting something together like that. Because I feel like no matter what topic we're talking about in cybersecurity, there's always these undertones, these similar themes that we sort of come across around secure configuration and compliance and vulnerabilities. And we have some of those same underlying themes. But I'm curious because there's been a number of authors recently in sort of the cybersecurity industry. And I know that there's other people out there that want to write books or are interested in writing books. Do you have any advice for them for sort of getting started and getting all those thoughts down on paper?
Yeah, absolutely. So the number one piece of advice is just start writing it, right? So sit down, what I usually do, because I'm constantly having ideas for books, is I go to a coffee shop and I just jot down all the subjects, right? So which could turn into chapter headings or subheadings in the book. So it's a very engineering-like approach. And kind of, see if you can get 12 to 15 subjects that all can be arranged in almost a story arc. So nonfiction is just like fiction. It has to have momentum and an arc, maybe a resolution and a conclusion. And then sit down and, just start writing, see how far you go and how easy the words flow if you've got lots and lots of ideas. the awesome thing about writing a book is you have original ideas that are correct, right? Based on your experience and background while you're writing. Things that you would not have thought to put down on paper until you're actually writing it in a really intense, focused way. And that's what draws me to the writing process. The other interesting thing is that nonfiction books, you can actually write just the outline and maybe the first chapter introduction and send it to the major publishers. So Pact, No Starch, Wiley, CNC, Rutledge, and they don't have the gatekeepers of agents in the way. And you can just start querying, and sometimes they'll come back and say, yeah, this is really topical. We think this will work. You have to demonstrate that you can be the author. But you just fill out their form on their website. It's a cool process.
Yeah, I can kind of attest to that myself because I'm in the process of writing a book on software supply chain security. And that's exactly what I did. I just started emailing, like pitching it to these publishing companies directly. And
Cool.
luckily, one of them bid on it. So here we are and off and running.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I should send you my pre-press chapter on supply chain security.
Oh, yeah. I would love to check it out.
Yeah. Get your input before it goes.
Yeah, I would love to check that out. And then one other thing I wanted to ask you about, actually dive a little deeper on this, is you mentioned like your research in the industry and vendors and the landscape and the ecosystem and so on. You dubbed this IT Harvest, I think is the organization's name or your effort's name, right?
Yep,
So
exactly.
how did that come about? And, what led you down the path of starting to trying to just track this crazy ecosystem that we have of vendors and tools and so on?
So remember, I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and, this was this is during the dot-com boom, and there was a service called DataQuest that was acquired by Gartner in 95. And when I joined Gartner in 2000, the only thing I knew about Gartner was the DataQuest tool set that they had, which was a subscription model that PwC had an enterprise license to. And I'm a news junkie about technology, and they had just a constant news feed of all the things going on in technology and ability to search and stuff like that. I get to Gartner, and I needed to create a magic quadrant for intrusion detection. So I asked the DataQuest team at Gartner if, to give me the list of all the vendors that have IDS so I can, decide which ones to include. They gave me a list of 6, only 2 of whom were actually IDS vendors. And the rest were just like, I don't know how they got that there. So when I left Gartner in 2005 and started IT Harvest, I wanted to harvest all data from the grounds up and just replicate DataQuest so that you could ask questions like, how many API security vendors are there? There are 27, by the way. How many threat intelligence vendors are there? 98. And you could just, quickly extract all that. And the only way to do that, you can do it individually. You can say, I'm just going to start looking for API security vendors, and maybe you'll find them. But at the same time, to find them, you're looking at every conference in the world to see who the exhibitors are. You're scanning news feeds for new funding and new startups. You're a lot of research. So you might as well collect all the data, which is what we do now, and then put it in a database so you can query it and get the answers quickly. And that's where we got to today, and finally launched a SaaS product to allow other people to do that with my data.
Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting and awesome that you've essentially been doing this for so many years. You've watched the evolution of the industry, and now you're using technology like cloud and SaaS, for example, to deliver it back to the industry to provide this information, which is really cool.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you serve in a variety of advisory roles, I've noticed too, as well.
Yep.
And I'm curious, how does your, experience and insight and in-depth knowledge of the industry and landscape help inform, one, what companies you may want to advise, or, spaces or niches you might want to advise in, as well as how does it help you advising these companies? Because I imagine you bring a lot of insight about the ecosystem and the landscape and the competitive market that many others simply just don't have.
Yeah, there's kind of a conflict between being an independent industry analyst and yet being on the advisory board of a vendor. as soon as you're on an advisory board in a particular space, the other vendors in that space don't want to work with you because you're conflicted. So they won't share inside information with you. And so when over the years, there'd be times when I would set IT Harvest aside and join Fortinet as CMO or WebRoot Software in the threat research side. And during those times, people would reach out and say, hey, you're no longer an analyst, so maybe you can be on our advisory board. And so I started accepting them then. And since then, I've realized, what, in all this time I've been a industry analyst, nobody's ever called me out on any conflicts. So as long as I'm transparent, and I'm getting away from needing, to be able to write a report on API security and have all the API security vendors reach out and ask me to speak at their events, stuff like that. I don't do that anymore. So it's easier to become an advisor. In an advisory role, you get to bring your experience and guide the vendor through some of the pitfalls that have been experienced before. And this is what I enjoyed most at Gartner and still enjoy most. But you can also introduce them to your network, right? You might know CISOs or partners that they should engage with, and you can be the connection to them. So you act kind of as a matchmaker. And of course, you're usually compensated by, the small chunk of stock that might eventually pay off equal to the advisory role. But so far it's just doesn't pay off big time, but it's worth engaging because you get the inside view of a particular industry. It's great.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, I guess whether it pays off or not, it's really a neat experience to understand like how organizations go to market and try to grow and even, have an exit or whatever the case is, or a merger and so on.
Yep. And one of the big attractions for me is working with the other advisors, right? Because they also have vast experience, and you extend your own network by doing that.
Yeah, that part in particular, because I have a couple of roles like that, is like networking with those other folks who have areas of expertise that I don't, typically because they bring together an advisory board of diverse, areas of expertise and background and so on. So yeah, definitely, it's definitely a good thing to emphasize. So I wanted to ask you, before we kind of pivot a little bit from IT Harvest, based on your industry research and stuff, you've been doing this for a long time. What would you say are some of the most alarming or interesting trends that we're seeing currently in the landscape of, IT and cyber? And what are something that has kind of just stayed the same and really hasn't changed?
Yeah, well, let's start with stay the same, because we're at least 22 years into the effort to gather all the data and somehow make it, which generates millions and millions of alerts, that the SOC people have to deal with. And there's this constant struggle to refine it down to just the ones you have to pay attention to, right? So you got a million alerts, let's narrow that down to 2,000, which is what the SIMs used to say they could do. And SIMs, 2,000 is too much for any SOC. I'm sorry, they can't triage 2,000 alerts. So we're going to add artificial intelligence. Oh, and we're going to enrich that data with, vulnerability stuff. So just pay attention to the alerts of an attack against a system that's vulnerable to that particular attack. And just keep going like that. So that's always going to stay the same. There's always going to be more data. But in the meantime, the pointy edge of the spear is what the attackers are doing. So I'm seeing a very interesting progression in threat intelligence, and ability to shift from the risk management model that, everything that went before is, collect the data, refine the data, do something about the data, do SOAR to automate what you do, to a threat-based model, which is, figure out who's attacking you or who's attacking your competitors or companies just like you, or companies that are vulnerable the way you are, right? And only the top SOCs in the world engage in this, but they are very, very interested in the threat landscape. So they look kind of outwards for that. And then you brought up the supply chain stuff. I've been waiting and fully expected in, early January of 2021, after SolarWinds. So we learned about SolarWinds. We go, oh my gosh, this is really bad. Somebody infects a supplier, and then the supplier's update has a backdoor in it. That's like, and then you look back at history and, oh, hey, that's happened a lot of times, right? So Flame was a NSA created malware that spoofed a Microsoft update. The attack on the phone systems in Athens during the Summer Olympics was an update to an Ericsson switch with a little help from an insider, evidently. And of course, NotPetya, the most damaging cyber attack in history, was exactly that, right? A little accounting software package update used to do the preliminary infection. So huge problem. The industry's response is, and you'll see this when I give you my part of my manuscript, the industry response is the software vendors have to do a better job. And that's totally true. Software vendors always have to do a better job, but that doesn't solve the problem for the buyer of the software, because they've got thousands of software vendors and there's no way to, certify, only buy from certified secure software development teams. There's got to be something you can do to stop installing software updates, which goes totally against the grain of all the advice that security pundits have given forever, which is upgrade immediately. And I've always been as suspicious of that, because I'm going, okay, why is, iTunes asking me to upgrade? Is it because there's a security issue, or is it because Apple wants more data from me? And I don't want them to take new data from me. And same thing with any enterprise software solution. And I haven't seen a solution yet. We're getting close. There are people that can do reverse engineering. Of course, that violates your contract with the software provider. They say you can't reverse engineer our software, but they could bend on. And of course, if a IBM comes to them and says, no, we're going to reverse engineer your stuff, change the contract, then they will. So we're just waiting for something like that. But not a single Israeli startup has gone to market yet to say, we've got this solved. Just put this gateway in there and we'll explode the software in a sandbox, or we'll diff we'll analyze the software and the compiled code and do a diff against the previous version. We'll tell you what changed, and then we can look into it. Still waiting.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you sort of hit, sort of emerging trends, right? Like things we're starting to be concerned about, and then some of the things that we see year to year, right? Same thing over and over again. I'm curious about what you found that's been most surprising to you, like over the last few years that you've been, pretty invested in this research. I know me personally, when I look at research and the statistics year over year and continuing to see that phishing attacks are still like the number one way that people get in and drop malware or ransomware. So I'm curious if you found something similar or anything else that's been surprising to you.
Yeah, it's no longer surprises me that people continue to get attacked, and it's because the population of companies likely to be attacked just grows and grows and grows, and the bad guys figure out new ways to monetize the benefits of an attack. So I see no end in sight for that. I was extremely surprised when over time we learned how good the NSA was at engaging in these types of attacks. So that really highlights when you think about, cyber defense writ large is protecting yourself against sophisticated attackers. Well, all attackers, but the sophisticated ones are the most expensive to defend against. And now we've identified who that attacker is, right? It's the Russian SRV, the Russian GRU, the PLA in China, maybe some Iranian and North Korean attacking teams that are funded by their governments. And of course, the biggest also has the biggest budget, and that's the NSA, right? Part of the DoD, and with a $10 billion plus dark budget. We don't know what they spend that money on. So it helps me think, okay, how would I defend myself against the NSA, right? Unfortunately, the answer might be don't get on the internet, but it's a start.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think one of the things, so taking that sort of like concern about APT groups or ransomware, malware, phishing attempts, right? Still, wherever they may come from. What would you say your top recommendations are then for organizations, whether small to medium-sized businesses that maybe don't have as large of a budget, or are, they want to help, protect themselves, but we got so many vulnerabilities coming in and so many risks. So where can they start, or what should they start with if they're trying to, build up their risk management program?
Yeah. So my first advice is don't do risk management. Just ignore everything you hear, right? Because you can't hire a risk officer and you don't know what the risk is. You can't measure probability. So just forget all that. Just start looking at defenses and do them now. And you can find the lists everywhere. Number one is institute two-factor authentication for everybody, for everything. Just do that and you'll be 99% in the clear. Okay, now you just have to worry about the 1%. For the ransomware side, back up your systems and test your recovery. It's so simple. It's when I first, started using computers in the early 80s, I had a CAD CAM system that I was responsible for, and I would back them up to tape at the end of every single day. And then every week I'd create a weekly backup, and every month I'd have a monthly backup, and we'd store them offsite in a safe. That has been totally automated. You can do it in the cloud. There's hundreds of fantastic solutions. Evidently, people aren't doing it. Colonial Pipeline's not doing it. I was very pleased when I went to press with Security Yearbook. My printer got hit by ransomware, which delayed the printing process 3 weeks. They recovered from backups. I was so impressed that they could do that.
Yeah, it's very cool for an organization like that to be doing it, but it also is very scary that other organizations who maybe are involved in critical infrastructure, for example, aren't.
Don't do it. Don't do it. And when you talk about the identifying likely targets and all the rest, the attackers are doing that for us. So you can either do your security or discover from the attacker why you need security. And the attackers are the best source of security awareness training in the world. It's just extremely expensive to be a victim.
Yeah, it's a one painful way to learn a lesson. That's for sure. So I wanted to ask you, you've been doing this for several decades in terms of industry research and analysis and so on. Looking out, say, and it's hard to make predictions, of course, but like looking out, say, 3 to 5 years, what would be a prediction you give about the landscape and the ecosystem within cyber that maybe some others, might not be thinking of or wouldn't see coming per se?
Yeah, on the attacker side, I look at them creating. Right now, they're in the playbook phase, right? So the attackers are figuring out what to do, and then they publish a playbook and try and sell it and all the rest. When they move into the automation phase, then the call to shorten the mean time to detect and mean time to block a attack, which right now, you're in the top 99th percentile if you can do that in a couple days. But now it's going to shrink to 2 minutes because an attacker is going to say, hey, I want to steal or get a foothold in the Active Directory domain controller for this company. They're going to push a button and it'll happen in minutes. And if you're sitting there relying on manual processes and eyes on screen and filtering and triaging, you're going to be lost. You won't be able to survive it. So start looking at, invest in automation now, because you're going to have to crank the dial on it all the way up to 11 in coming years. The industry itself, I think, will always grow with, basically technology revolutions. And we're in the middle of one right now, right? We're in the middle of several, as always, but certainly, the cloud and so-called digital transformation that goes along with it has been around for 8 years, and yet the penetration into SMBs and even some state and very large organizations is low. So that's going to continue, and as they do that, that leads to the need for more security, and so the security industry itself will grow with that technology innovation. Or drones, or now space is becoming a big area of investment in technology. So it'll keep going. So as long as you have a future view that includes technology being more and more important, then security will be also more and more important.
Yeah, good. That's really interesting. Well, okay. So before I take us out for our last question, I wanted to ask you. I know that you're working on the book. The book's coming out. Can you give us a little more information on that, or anywhere that people can find you? Anything else you're working on that you wanted to share?
Yeah, sure. So still working on the app, which we're up to our 12th seat holder. So it's kind of like an industry analyst seat. So it's like going to Gartner, but instead of the 54 industry analysts at Gartner that cover security, you get me, the most senior industry analyst in security. And instead of the PDFs of Magic Quadrants, you just get access to the app so you can do your own research. And then I'm sitting there curating the data, but also helping you with your thesis, whatever it may be, competitive analysis, selling to cybersecurity companies, etc. And then, I'm going to dedicate NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, to writing next year's edition, the 2023 version of this book. And it's going to be very different this year because I've got the app. So now I've got tons of graphics that I can include. And we've done a better job of segregating the industry into only 660 subcategories. So we can start spelling out what some of those are, who the players are in that space. I've got a book that I co-wrote with two other authors coming out in January called Net Zeros and Ones, how data erasure promotes sustainability, privacy, and security. So for practitioners in data security and ESG, that's going to be a very interesting thing. Yeah, so my plate's full.
Yeah, just a couple things going on, just writing a couple of books, have a couple things coming out. Okay, good. Well, that'll take us to our last question, which we ask everyone. So what does cyber resiliency mean to you?
Yeah, to me, it means one, reducing the number of things you fall to, right? So certainly it means that, somebody's not going to be able to phish one of your employees and gain access, right? And there's plenty of ways to stop that from happening. But the important thing is the time to recover. So even if it's what to somebody else might be a devastating attack that makes them shut the doors, you just, flip some switches and you're down for 24 hours, but you're back and running. Because that, to me, is the definition of resiliency, right? The ability to pick yourself up and keep going.
Awesome. Perfect answer. Well, I want to say a huge thank you, Richard, for joining us today, talking all things about writing and research and analysis in the cybersecurity industry. So thanks again for joining us this week. That'll take us out, and we'll see everybody next week.